Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Crow Better. And I'm excited to have with me today Jeremey Donovan from Insight Partners on the podcast. Welcome, Jeremey.
Thanks for having me, Brennan. Yeah, excited to chat today.
Well, Jeremy, I've been looking forward to this. I don't say that with empty words. Even as I was talking to you in show prep, I'm a big fan of your content, your point of view. I think one of the things that makes you a little bit different than some of the other subject matter experts that are kind of on channels like LinkedIn is that you really bring the data behind a lot of your opinions. And that I think that they're few and far between that actually take the time to bring that point of view to market. So just know that I appreciate it and I respect your approach.
Yeah, I'd say in data I trust, and it comes from the fact that I was an engineer, originally a semiconductor engineer, and have stayed pretty passionate about not so much the semiconductor industry, but about an engineering approach to the things I work on. I also have spent a lot of time, and I think, for those listeners who are more in the RevOps world, I've spent since my literally my teenage years hacking. I don't think of myself as a programmer, but certainly a hacker to this day, picking up new programming languages and, in this age of AI and ML, trying to pick that stuff up too. And then statistics as well. So, put all those things together, and that is why you see that data-driven approach that I have. I'm writing for me. I'm actually not writing for anybody else. I'm writing to answer my own questions.
Well, I think you were ahead of the curve then, because I think that the market is shifting more in your direction. That whole like the sales and art or science, and I think you've brought that scientific approach that is becoming more and more mainstream. And Jeremy, you talked a little bit about your background, but from a story arc perspective, I mentioned you're at Insight Partners now, but like even so, how did you get to Insight? You talked a little bit about kind of the origin story, but what in between? How did you end up at Insight Partners, and what role are you playing at Insight today?
I'm getting old, so there's a pretty long path, but it basically the hyperspeed version is semiconductor engineering to market research to product development, product marketing, product management, corporate marketing, CRO, and then RevOps. And RevOps has really been where the passion is. And then about 3 years ago, the company that I was at previously was acquired, and I had the great opportunity to move over to Insight, who was our lead investor. And my job here is advising. We have over $90 billion of assets under management, over 500 B2B SaaS portfolio companies. My team and I advise about 120 of those. So I get this incredible opportunity to see like a super wide variety of go-to-market motions and tools and technologies that these folks are creating. And I'm a kid in a candy store because not only is there a ton of data, but when I take those tests like StrengthsFinder, the thing I always index super high on is learning. I just love to learn. I'm a super curious person. And then, yeah, I mean, going back to some of the stuff that I comment on, is usually because someone asked me, and I'm like, I don't like, I've never seen fact-based analytical approach to answering that question. I don't know that I believe the conventional wisdom, so I'm going to go test this. So that's usually the impetus for my approach.
That's awesome. To your point, I mean, Insight Partners is great. In my past life, I was in the portfolio and can only say positive things or great things, I should say, about Insight Partners. I think the operating team that you guys have there with Pablo and what you're bringing is truly a differentiator. And if you're in the B2B SaaS space and you're looking for capital, then you should definitely have Insight on your radar. But I think even going back to what you were just saying, Jeremy, in terms of like what you're passionate about in terms of learning, and the environment that you get to be a part of. You sound like you're kind of a scientist in the lab, and what better
Yeah,
lab
yeah,
than
yeah.
you have at Insight?
I
Um,
am. The most recent one is I do a lot of we do a lot of CRO hiring, but I often don't get necessarily super involved personally in AE hiring. But yet that's always been an interest and passion of mine because, right, if you're a CRO, you're directing, right? Ultimately, whether, whatever level of CRO you are, first level, second level, third, or beyond, depending on the size of the company, right? Like you're setting the tone and you're setting the process and you're setting the expectations for what great looks like. in both the hiring process as well as the hiring profile. And that was another one where I think this has historically been a lot of art and not a lot of science, and a lot of opinions that have spanned time because somebody said it somewhere, it seems to make sense, and now we all hire the same way based on that. So, I mean, a really good example of this to test is I'm a big fan of the PTC, everything that comes out of what used to be called Parametric Technology Corporation, PTC, because those folks went on to form a amazing set of companies, right? PTC, Blade Logic, App Dynamics, Zscaler, and now a lot of those folks are at Snowflake, but there's others at Rubrik and elsewhere. So, a lot of amazing SaaS companies, and they all come from the same heritage that John McMahon had. You know, it, partly he would be the last person to take full credit for it, but partly created. And they have a hiring framework. They call it ICE, ICCE, and the I is intelligence. So, originally that was, I think, pretty much pure IQ. I think that's been broadened now to be IQ and EQ. The first C, and people debate these C's a little bit, but the first C is character. And the character, one of the character, well, I guess two of the main character traits. One was like, what adversity have you overcome? Did you hustle? Like in that same category is like, did you have to work your way through college, right? Did you pay your way through school, that kind of thing. The other
Yeah.
part of character, though, is the one we often hear about hiring AEs is, do they play sports? Are they competitive, right? But that's part of the character aspect. There's a curiosity, that's the other C. And then and coachability is kind of in that as well. That's the second C, if you will, parts A and B. And then the E is experience. And way back in the day when they were hiring people to join PTC, that's a CAD, mechanical computer aided design software. It wasn't as if they had a ton of people to go out and hire. So experience for them was the last, and it was in that order, by the way: intelligence, character, coachability, and experience, in that order. But like, those are the kinds of things that are somewhat testable. Can't necessarily test everything, but you can kind of test those things. So over time, I've tried to test those with data, but then also just think about the process independent of the data. Like, that's the profile that you're testing, but what about the process?
Yeah. Well, before we get into process, I mean, I really like the framework of ICE. So you talk about intelligence, character, curiosity, coachability, and then experience, which is I like that a lot. But like you mentioned, like oftentimes the things that you start to um, dig into are oftentimes brought to you, or you're seeing something happening in the market. So maybe let's start there before we get into processes. What was the catalyst for that? I know you may have conversations, but what are you seeing from the market, especially even kind of what we talked about, the do more with less, the productivity type of narrative, AI, like there's a lot going on. So like what was the root of saying, hey, I need to investigate not only the profile, but the process by which to hire. So
Yeah,
what are the threads there?
I think I mean, I'd say there's like a bunch simultaneously, kind of a mosaic theory, if you will, to what was going on, right? So one is rep productivity for years and years had been on the decline, to the point where I think 2 years ago, RepView put this data out, something like only 30 or 35% of reps would meet or exceed quota 2 years ago. And it improved. I think they had some data out this not too long ago that I think it improved to closer to 40% for 2024. Partly on the basis of the fact that, like, I mean, it's sort of an unfortunate reason, but it's companies had overhired and they pared back to become more efficient, right? The euphemism for layoffs. And as a consequence, right, the demand that was there, either through channel partners or marketing or self-sourcing into the ICP or SDRs, whatever, like, that demand was able to be spread over fewer reps, so therefore they were a bit more productive. So I mean, one piece is like the drop in sales productivity was a motivator. The other one, and I'll credit Pete Kazanji, whose posts I read a lot on LinkedIn for this. He's kind of railing against the fact that, hey, in the zero interest rate environment, reps were there was so much money flowing that reps were taking orders. right? They were much more transactional even on larger enterprise deals. And you can argue that, but if you accept at least that premise in part, the 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 consequence of it is like we were hiring people who might not have fit the ICE criteria, and even if they did or didn't, we were completely failing to train them at all. And then on top of that, we massively over specialized, right? Where you've got lead LDRs, right? Or GTM engineers, that's the new term for that. You've got SDRs, you've got new logo AEs, you've got AMs, CSMs, sales engineers, like a zillion different roles. And, the AEs um, didn't didn't learn how to be full cycle AEs. So that's I think another driver for that. And then yeah, the selfish or whatever driver for me for at least a decade, this concept of being able to play Moneyball in hiring has fascinated me. And I don't know that there's a great answer. Most of the analysis that I've done, what you'll find is maybe there's a biographical trait, and having that trait in your biography, like, what type of degree you earned in school or whatever it is, having that trait might be correlated, statistically significantly correlated with higher performance or higher, degree of success. But the absolute percentage differences are small. Like if you have the trait, maybe there's a 52% chance you're going to be successful, and if you don't have the trait, there's a 48%. And it's statistically different. If you were to hire a lot of AEs, then that would manifest itself. So if you're a super big tech company or a super big company that's hiring hundreds, if not thousands of AEs, like that 4% difference would make a huge difference. If you're a small startup, I wouldn't make a decision on the basis of some of those factors.
Yeah. And then would you say, and maybe this gets into the process portion, but even going back to like the acronym with ICE, have you seen like, hey, in light of what you just talked about, historically we over-index to this one. Now it's like the weight has changed. I know you were talking about, hey, even just like the percentage variance for certain things at a high volume type of organization, but even if you were to isolate to, hey, this type of whether it's character or intellect or experience or coachability, this now is should be front and center for XYZ reason, or does that get
Yeah,
in the process?
I think the sad truth from what I've observed is I don't know what the percentage is, but the vast majority of the time, hiring is unstructured and in my mind, like fly by the seat of your pants, chaotic.
Yeah.
So I don't even know that it's necessarily a shift as much as it is a total lack of discipline. And I'll tie this back, and this is kind of what kicked off my interest a decade ago. Was there was a book published by this guy Laszlo Bach called Work Rules. He was ex McKinsey, but joined Google as their head of HR and took an extremely analytical approach to the way that Google went about hiring people. And in that book, he references an academic study that I've now read scores of times by Frank and Schmidt. And that study talks about the correlation between the correlation between different uh, hiring selection criteria and ultimate performance in the job. And what they found was there's like three things that matter, and I'll sort of give a plus one. But one is intelligence, so that correlates with the I in ICE. The other is conscientiousness, which is a big five personality trait, and I think correlates a bit with the character and curiosity and coachability aspects, like the two C's. I think those tie ultimately to that's that other C. And then the third thing is like actual demonstration of job skill, right? So if you were to do a role play, or if writing were a significant component for a role, to make somebody do a writing sample, under observation and time pressure. So, or if they're, gonna be an enterprise account executive, that they can build out an account plan or talk through, the sales process that they have gone through. So those are the three big things. And then my plus one is basically they also looked at whether people conducted structured or unstructured interviews. An unstructured interview is what most of us have encountered. It's like the person probably didn't, they sort of had on their calendar that they need to interview you, and they look at your LinkedIn profile 5 minutes before so that they're not they don't seem completely unprepared to interview you. And then they just ask their usual questions, like whatever they are. And then in their subconscious, they're thinking, do I want to have a beer with this person or be stuck in a canoe with them for a few hours? And based on that, they decide to hire or not hire. So that's what unstructured looks like. Structured looks quite different. Structured is I know that there are 8 traits that are important when I'm hiring an account executive. And for each one of those 8 traits, I'm going to come up with 3 questions. And those questions might have a scoring rubric of what's a 5? Let's say you're on a 5-point scale. What's a 5? Is a cat making an appearance? What's a 5? What's a 3? And what's a 1? And then let's say you do 4 interviews. Each interviewer would ask like questions around the 2 traits, and they're going to ask those same exact 3 questions for each one of the traits and score those. And then you roll that up in the end so that you actually have like a very objective approach to interviewing people. And it's not just, sure, there may be a cultural fit component to that. And, we can argue how much that should be weighted or not, but at least on the structured component, you're going to get those answers to those 3 questions on those 8 traits or, n number of traits and truly be able to objectively score people. So anyway, that's what structured looks like. And if you want to take that to the next level, and then I'll pause, taking that to the next level is I'm actually going to certify the people who interview. So if you and I were to both interview on, on a particular trait, then we would maybe, watch a video or do some kind of interactive role play and then be asked to score. And we should, in theory, score similarly. And if we don't, we should get some feedback on like why was it that we're scoring differently so that we can calibrate in the process.
It almost makes too much sense.
It's these things are. It's also like one of the things I don't know is we're all looking for silver bullets, right? And I was looking for a silver bullet with Moneyball sales hiring, but there's the silver bullets are right in. I think I would almost say they're right in front of us, but they're not silver bullets. They're kind of hard, right? I mean,
Right.
to actually take the time to build out what are the traits I'm looking for, and even better is I'm going to determine those traits by looking at the difference between my top AEs and the ones who are not performing or who are gone, right? So I'm really being analytical about those traits. So, like, these things are known, and we just don't do them. It's like brushing and flossing, or whatever. Not eating right, exercising, meditating, whatever. Like we know these things help us, and yet we don't do them. So yeah, so like I think this is one of those things where yes, it takes a little bit of work, but you're gonna hire way more effectively as a result.
Yeah, and I think it kind of goes to me. There's also a little bit of a paradigm shift around accountability, and so kind of one of the things you led with was, hey, if you look at performance metrics that companies, reps are hitting, I think you said like 35-40%. It's debatable what the actual numbers. Regardless, it's abysmal,
Hmm.
and you could argue that some of that is rep induced or market conditions or poor forecasting. But man, what if you actually took a little bit extra time with the AE process, and that number went from, you know, 30 to 50, even 50%, even though that's not even marginal. That's actually a pretty
Yeah.
big dang jump. You start to kind of say,
Even
hey, return on that investment from a time perspective is just, it is worth it. Like, and you can
yeah,
quantify that.
every percent matters, and it's we've been talking so far about the profile and the hiring process, and then there's a third part that's really important, right? Which is the onboarding and enablement process, and that also has been like quite broken for quite some time. Um, that uh, the person who wrote that book again, Laszlo, hooked me up with a Harvard professor that he interacts with a lot on this kind of stuff. And that Harvard professor said, "Hey, go take a look at basically whether or not certain companies are talent incubators or not." And the way I went about that was I said, "What is the success rate of people after they work for a certain company versus, other companies?" And I define success because all I have is LinkedIn profiles. So the best I can do is to define success as they lasted at least 2 years in the next job, which is around the median lifespan for an account executive in the SaaS world. So like, did you last more than the median in your next job? And like that was a super fascinating exercise, right? As guided by this Harvard professor, because yeah, there are statistically significant differences, and it suggests that right some of these companies have way better um, onboarding, and it implies, right, because it's correlation, not
Right.
causation, but it implies that some of these companies have way better onboarding and ongoing training programs. But I think the ongoing training is not necessarily just formal, it's the informal systems that exist within the company. So, by way of example, that company I mentioned earlier, PTC, is one of those companies where they are a talent incubator, that the probability of success is much higher for people who went through PTC than it is for people who went through a lot of other companies. So it's saying, hey, there really is a there, and they're incredibly disciplined about pipe gen to the point where they define what you do on each day of the week, and what the role of not just the AE is, but everybody else on the customer facing team, all the way out up to the executive leadership. They spend a lot of time on training, like formal training and onboarding. They spend a ton of time, right? They're the inventors of Medic, so their deal reviews are incredibly disciplined, and on and on and on, right? There's like this whole system basically that they're running, a playbook that they're
Hmm.
running, and that playbook translates into not only success in the company, but statistically higher probability of success once you go to a new company. Um, so yeah, that study, I kind of I put everything out on LinkedIn, so that study is out there on LinkedIn. There is another factor, just for those who do look up that study, is like, yeah, the industry and size of the companies matters also. So PTC people probably left and went to big companies. And big companies, AEs at larger companies last longer than AEs at smaller companies, just because of those things like training and onboarding, but also the risk and volatility of the larger companies is lower. So by necessity, people are going to tend
Yeah.
to stay longer.
And then what about that's really yeah, that makes sense in terms of because I was going to ask you about that is like, hey, this this is compelling, and I'm wondering, hey, but would you say it's, hey, for some people, they say, I don't have the time, the resources, I'm growing too fast, or I'm not that size. So I think you addressed that. But the last question I have for you, like if you think about, and the data may not all be there yet, but if you think about just like macro kind of themes or trends, when now that we moved, I don't know if we call hybrid is the right word, but just now distributed teams, different kind of like the technology that we are now experiencing, just the mentality of the sales persona, whether it's on the profile of the candidate or the process. How is that being modified? Like so, for example, we talk about intelligence. You mentioned historically it's been like just kind of the IQ, raw intelligence, but the emotional intelligence is starting to play or is starting to be considered. Like that would be what I want to double click on is how is that candidate profile changing in light of what we're seeing with how people work and the tools they use to be successful.
It's right, company by company, and it's slow. I did run into a company the other day, which um, fascinated me. So they decided that they are only going to hire people with STEM degrees. And there are not a lot of salespeople who have science, technology, engineering, and math STEM degrees. But the data does say that those people are statistically more likely to be successful. There's a correlation basically between having had a STEM degree and being and lasting 2 or more years in a company in sales. There's just so few of them. But this company has said, hey, like we're gonna go and we're gonna pay at the 95th percentile for sales compensation in order to attract these people and bring them in. So like that is a potential example. There were times when the market was not so hot where it was not unusual to give people an IQ test or a personality test to pull out conscientiousness. Larger companies still do that, but the smaller companies tend not to do that. And the hotter the job market is, people don't have to tolerate, quote unquote,
Yeah,
tolerate that. But yeah, that kind of stuff I think can come back in. So you're going to tease out, right, IQ and EQ there in the process. So um, I mean, I do think humans adapt, right? I mean, I don't know that it's necessarily different people, but I do think we adapt to what what the world and what the environments we sell in need.
for sure. And I think the IQ, it's if you're an NFL fan, as we're recording this, it's the combine, which means the Wonderlic test is going
They
out.
do.
So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, it'd be interesting to see how you can bring that back in. But to your point, it's an interesting, like, I don't know about trade-off, but there is just this idea of like what can the business absorb as it relates to investments on this type of infrastructure that would allow them to start to bring in these elements to ensure that the success rate is higher, and therefore, in theory, they're hitting their
Yeah.
revenues because
That Yeah,
go ahead.
yeah. That structure matters. Like some of the more you were asking about trends, like some of the other interesting ones. So one is like go hire STEM grads, which is a surprising thing, and that historically going into sales was not the natural path for them. Another one I ran across was people exclusively promoting from within. So they would, they will not promote a first line manager, or they won't hire a first line manager from the outside or any line sales leader from the outside. You have to be promoted from within. So that ties to a third one, which is another talent incubator company, and it's you're comparing. I'm comparing them to their peers, right? So in this case, Oracle, I might compare to other large B2B like jumbo B2B tech companies, and yet they have incrementally higher success rate of people who are there. And Oracle's approach is to explicitly, and there's obviously this is all rules are meant to be broken, but is like to explicitly hire out of 30 particular colleges that they know have candidates who achieve success there, and then to develop them as opposed to hiring superstars from other peer organizations.
Hmm.
So like they're very much about internally grown talent, which relates to that promote from within, but it also just relates to long time AEs. And I spoke to the former CEO of Oracle a few years back and about this process, and one of the things he said like, are there any special criteria of the people that you're actually hiring as graduates? He said, yeah, we looked at GPA and this and that, degree, blah, blah, blah. Like we looked at a million things. He said, at the end of the day, the one biggest thing that mattered was a diversity of experiences.
Hmm.
So it's not that you were the top volleyball player. It's that you played volleyball and you were in the band and you were in Model UN, right? It was some sort of diversity of experience that they were looking for, and I think that this brings this whole thing full circle because those are the people that were, curious and pursuing multiple things, and at least again for their sales force, that rather than the lone wolf superstar, they're looking for people, and it makes sense at Oracle, right? Because it's a multi you
Right.
probably got 20 people on each side of the table for doing a 10 million or $50 million deal, right? Like it is the farthest thing from a lone wolf pursuit.
Yeah, that context matters. 'Cause I was about to say, like, it's a good reminder for the world or at least like I guess the parenting that I mean, I have three little kids, but it's like the hyper specialization that continues to be, even just using like sports as an example, but just like what you just described of like the diversity, which inherently creates a curiosity, is immensely valuable. Well, Jeremy, I think that was we'll wrap it up there. Unless you have any other final thoughts as it relates to how the CROs, that go-to-market owner, these scaling organizations can think about how important it is to hire. I think we conceptually understand that. Even going back to your original points, this isn't new. Like everyone understands it. It's just a matter of, are you willing to do the perceived hard thing to ensure long-term success?
Totally. Yeah, that's it. I think that's the exclamation mark on that one.
Well, hey, keep writing, keep investigating. We're all better because of it. Really do appreciate you taking the time to come on. I know our community really benefits from it. So thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
All right, I'll see you.